You're watching Charter Local Edition from the Central Coast. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined again by Devin Best. He is the best executive director of the Upper Salinas Las Tablas Resource Conservation District. Remind us, sir, what is an RCD?
An RCD is a resource conservation district. We help landowners with land management, watershed restoration, soil conservation.
And there are RCDs up and down the state?
Yeah, we're a special district under the California law.
And in some communities, RCDs elect directors.
Correct, and others appoint.
And in yours, it's?
They're appointed.
Appointed by the Board of Supervisors, I presume.
Yeah.
And so you've only recently been with the RCD, right?
About 2 years.
Oh, so it's been a little while.
Yeah.
So just in time to enjoy the benefits of the drought, right?
Yes.
It's been a rough ride indeed, and I want to talk to you about the drought, if I may, sir.
Mm-hmm.
You're a scientist, you know more than me, but I used to say, we're going to have a Godzilla El Niño, and this is going to be great, and it's the most powerful on record, and I thought I was so smart, and boy, I was not so smart. What happened?
Well, again, referring back to my last time I was here, I point out that we live in an area that is in between we don't have a normal. We have either extremes. We have either drought or floods.
Why?
Because where the atmospheric rivers kind of come across through here, and then the ocean currents as well.
So you'll love this. My daughter, literally today, she did a presentation on El Niño.
Okay.
In her history class, they were doing kind of a current event unit. And so I really kind of was reading what she was writing and, through my research for this show. And I understood now that it's these warm waters near the equator. They kind of push up warm air, which I guess impacts the atmospheric river coming from Japan.
Yes.
And it comes literally across the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. But I guess the problem has been, even though this El Niño is, listen to this, my friends, 2.5 times the size of the continental U.S., it's pushed north.
That's
and
correct.
So north of us on the Central Coast and even into the Pacific Northwest, they're getting the rain when we thought we'd be getting the rain in Central and Southern.
So a few weeks ago, I was up in Oregon and I was visiting folks up there at a conference, River Restoration Northwest Conference actually, and they were talking about the drought of 2014. The 1 year.
right.
And they were saying, some of our creeks almost dried up. I said, that's great.
Yeah.
Some of my creeks almost flowed. That's how much difference there is. And it's been pushed further north. And I actually went to Santa Rosa not too long ago.
Right.
And there's puddles and wetlands and streams are flowing. But here we come back to our Central Coast and we're still dry. And it's starting to green up, but it's still not enough to actually fully recharge.
Right. And you look at the Sierra Nevadas, and I remember reading that there was a concern that if Northern California received the El Niño that the South was going to get, it would be wet rain.
Right.
And so we wouldn't have snowpack.
Right.
Well, that's wrong. The snowpack is almost at average.
Right.
When last year it was at 5% of normal.
Right, but almost at average, it's still on a deficit from the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And even a few weeks ago, I was up in the Sierras, and there's actually no snowpack now. So now we're waiting for the snowpack to come back again.
Right. With parts, though, there's still snowpack.
There's still some, but it's just not as deep and as thick as it should be.
So what do you think throughout the rest of the spring? Do you feel as if Central and Southern California, will those conveyor belt of storms arrive?
That's what I'm worried about, actually.
So let's talk about that, because I think your point is extremely well taken. Yeah. And I want to talk about flooding, because the RCDs up and down the state look at the question of flooding. I know that in anticipation of El Niño, a lot of areas were clearing debris basins, they were clearing flood channels, they were stocking up on sandbags. They haven't had to use many of those sandbags, but do talk to us about flood control and what you are doing in anticipation of a potential flood.
So there's multiple approaches to this. A lot of this we've been talking about is doing managed aquifer recharge. So
what does that mean?
That's basically moving water into areas where it'll percolate into the groundwater better and at a safer rate. There's also floodplain restoration, so trying to expand the amount of capacity that we actually have within our watersheds. The other thing too is trying to develop recharge basins. I mentioned this before, and last time I was here, about creating areas where there can actually be water that is slowly kind of percolated back into the groundwater. But the other part of this is we're looking at how to manage the actual stream corridors and culverts, stream crossings, as well as trying to get out all the clearing that needs to be taken place.
But as I understand it, part of the problem is the ground is so dry that the water will just run off.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so is it running off and creating floods or running off into the ocean?
It's running off and creating floods.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the concern that we're at right now is as this El Niño is being predicted, and as you said, Godzilla of El Niño is starting to form, is you've taken a long expanse of water and all of a sudden you shortened it into a shorter time frame, so it's going to be a lot more intense. Even though the ground's dry, there's a certain saturation point, and after that, it's just going to start flooding.
But if we get, as I understand El Niños, they are supposed to provide these conveyor belt of storms.
Right.
So it's kind of one storm after another, not necessarily massive storms,
Right.
with some space in between. Is there some solace there?
There is some, but here we are, and we're already getting into March.
Right.
And as you get closer into March, I mean, how many more months do we have
But
for all the
meaning
rain?
in terms of flood risk,
Right.
is there a concern that,
Right.
well, I'm just wondering if the way El Niños present as the conveyor belt of non-massive storms.
So I'll refer back to 1995, and those of us that lived in here in 95 will remember that we had some rains in from December all the way through in January and February, but it was all of a sudden in Miracle March, as we're approaching, all of a sudden we had enough flooding that caused severe damage all up and down the Salinas, all up and down the Central Coast because of the intensity and that it just wasn't enough time in between storm events to get the water into the ground.
So I want to ask you about these rivers and channels where we don't see any flow.
Right.
What we have seen, and it may not be within your purview, but I want to speak with you about it, is folks living in these channels and living in these rivers. And we know, because there's no water there, and we know that with our homeless crisis increasing not only on the Central Coast, but throughout the state, including and especially in Los Angeles County, which has been trying to pull people out of dams and rivers and streams, that there's a serious risk. So is the RCD or are your partners involved in trying to speak with those folks?
More of our partners, the RCD not specifically, but I do know that the city of Paso has been making a concerted effort to try and help people to move out of there and get the information out to them, explain to them why this would be a concern. Of course, when there's no rain, it's a little bit harder to make that explanation to them, but again, they're trying to do what they can to help people understand that this could be a serious risk to their health.
So give me a sense about how everything is going on the conservation side, because we still need to conserve. And as I understand it, sir, California's done a pretty noble job at its conservation efforts, but as the months progress, our conservation percentages are dropping. And as we speak today, even though we saw dropping percentages, we're now below 25% overall as a state. And so
I think what happens is during crisis, people will conserve more, but when we have a moment where there's a sort of a release of pressure on them, then they will go back to sort of their norm. One example I had of that was, people are washing their cars right now, and it's in a rainy season. I mean, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for this area. That's just one small little example of that. But I think that the problem we run into is there's only so much we can serve. And then what do? Then you need to find some other way to supplement or augment that water supply. And so I think we need to look at long term, what do municipalities have for their projected goals? What is open range, open landscapes, how do they do conservation?
How do they?
Well, we're trying, that's back to my whole watershed approach of doing, when there is rain, trying to make sure that we slow it down and put it back into the groundwater. That's one conservation measure, making sure we have healthy soils as well. And then trying to use whatever impervious surfaces that we have created to try and capture water through rain catchment basins.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen your parking lots. They're actually acting as groundwater recharge. How does that work, sir?
Well, so the water that is collected on an impervious surface, such as this table, would collect into a collection system and go into basically a cistern that could slowly release that water later.
But as you drive over the parking lot, you don't necessarily realize that the pores are small.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Coastal RCD actually has put together a storm rewards program, and if people are going around here locally, they'll see signs that says storm rewards program. We've talked to Coastal RCD about trying to see about expanding that program and going to the county about looking at if they're interested in partnering with us.
Is it expensive to build those types of parking lots?
Not necessarily. I mean,
because that's inspired.
But then think about the cost savings, is because now you have stormwater that you're going to have to manage for. So it may be expensive on the upfront, like solar power, but then at the same time it reduces. So
he is Devin Best with the Upper Salinas Las Tablas RCD Executive Director. I'm Brad Pomerance on the Central Coast. It's Charter Local Edition.